Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Star Revelations with me, Morgana Sophia, and the gorgeous Maria Jones. Maria, welcome.
Hi. We're so excited to talk about Venus retrograde today, aren't we?
Oh, we are. So we finally got round to recording, having had a long natter about what we want to say today, and it feels really big. It feels really, really expansive, and we are going into Venus retrograde on the 2nd of March, 10 degrees of Aries, which Maria will tell us a little bit more about. But Venus currently is in her shadow period, and she's been in her shadow period since last week. And there's been some interesting moves in the collective, which we are going to pick up a little bit later on. But Venus retrograde, Maria, tell me a little bit more about the technical aspects of a Venus retrograde.
So, Venus retrograde happens around every 18 months. And during the retrograde, Venus will transition from an evening star to a morning star, this time anyway. So she will appear to disappear from our skies for a little while during this time. And this disappearance of Venus has long been correlated to the myth of the descent of Inanna, where the goddess herself descends into the underworld. So this is around a 6-week period where Venus disappears and then reappears in the skies. So, as Lexi's just said, the retrograde's going to begin around the 2nd of March at 10 degrees of Aries. And Venus will station direct on the 24th of April at 24 degrees Pisces. So we've got this kind of cross sign energy, which is making this retrograde really unique because Venus is carving a path out for Saturn and Neptunia. They're all crossing this year, this 0 point, this Aries degree, which is the beginning and end of all things. It's the beginning and the end of the silver wheel. And it's extra significant. There's just so much going on with this retrograde. I don't know how we're going to pack it all into
Well,
one discussion because we've also got Mercury who will be
indeed.
retrograding at the same time, around the same degrees. And we've got Venus in conjunction with Neptunia and the North Node. And just doing a little bit of research ahead of our recording today, I have just become aware that as Venus leaves her retrograde shadow and her retrograde phase and conjuncts Neptunia for the third time, they will both be at 1 degree of Aries. And this will be the first Venus Neptune conjunction in Aries for 165 years. So, again, this is a once in a lifetime kind of event. So, we've got this real kind of archetypical blend that is happening here, this kind of Neptunian Piscean energy and this Venus in Aries. And of course, we've got Mars still retrograde as we're speaking. We've got the ruling planet of Aries still retrograde. They're going to do a bit of a crossover, aren't they? Mars will go direct
Mm.
27th of February, I think. Venus goes retrograde a week after. So we've got this huge focus on these two archetypes. So those are a little bit of the technicalities. But what I will say is now Venus is in her shadow. She's made these first conjunctions with Neptune in the North Node in early February. So the things that are unfolding now, we're going to be working with until mid-April. And we've got an eclipse season as well, just for fun.
It keeps on coming.
Yeah, it keeps on coming.
And I think I was going to mention this a bit later on, but I think it's really important to talk about it now. If we look at what's happened in the past week, as Venus has gone into her retrograde shadow period, in the way that women are being perceived with their bodies, kind of by the collective at the Grammys, perhaps.
Mm,
It was really interesting to see that come up literally as Venus goes into her retrograde shadow. We have, oh, and you'll remember her name, Bianca Censori, is that her right name?
it is. I think that's
Doing
very
the thing that
interesting.
she did at the Grammys, which I was perhaps for me the shadow side of Venus in Pisces. But is it a foretaste of what's to come? Is it a foretaste of how women are going to be expected to look and behave?
Well, what was really interesting to me about that and the kind of media frenzy that was surrounding it was that we've got this whole dichotomy playing out, which is so Pisces and
Mm.
Aries. So we've got half of the kind of media outlets, half the people that are commentating are really saying, discussing this Piscean shadow. She's being coerced, she's being manipulated, all of these shadowy Piscean energies. And then you've got the other half saying, no, it's Venus in Aries, she's empowered, she's expressing her sensuality. So it's like, where are the boundaries?
And what is truth as well? What is truth? What is true for some is not true for others, and our perceptions as well can be really clouded by this kind of retrograde shadow of, are we going to be the Venus in Aries kind of warrioress, or are we going to be in the Piscean waters where we can be boundaryless? With you and I both having Venus in Pisces, we know what boundaryless is like.
We do. I think we're uniquely qualified because we're both Aries with Venus in Pisces. So we
Pisces.
know how to, we know how challenging it can be to embody both of these archetypes because we were discussing some of the great Aryan archetypes before we came on, weren't we? We were talking about, the archetype of Boudica, and then, we were talking about more modern day archetypes like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We both
My
loved.
personal favourite.
Yeah, we both grew up on Buffy and Xena the Warrior Princess. So both of those actresses have a lot of Aries in their chart. And this is the Aryan energy. It's like, this empowerment, this confidence, this I will go to war to defend what is dear to me. For me, the Aries archetype is very much Freya, that goddess of
Mm,
war and lust. And, that's the one of the faces of Inanna too, if we look back through history. And then we've got this Piscean energy, which is this very kind of delicate feminine, right? This shapeshifter type energy. This energy which, encourages us to be the oracle, to be in that dreaming visionary state. But as we've said, has very few boundaries.
if any.
Yes, yeah. Well, we've had to learn some
Yeah,
with
I think
Saturn
I've
coming
ever
through.
been described as being delicate.
No,
But
no.
it's interesting as you kind of look to the whole year, not just this kind of Venus retrograde, Mercury retrograde, Saturn Neptune retrograde, everything just constantly crossing over in from the new into the old, back into the new. It's a dance essentially, isn't it? It's like this is what you can have, this is what you need to clear up, and then this is what you're going to have again. But it's really, for me, creating quite a lot of polarity as well. If we particularly go back to the Grammys again, look at the polarity that's
Mm,
being created between the 2 points, the death and the beginning. I think that for me is only going to get bigger in the collective, and I think we'll see more shadows coming out as well around that. Are we going to stay stuck in the old ways, or are we going to blaze forward? And if we're staying stuck in the old ways, the new ways scare us because it's taking us to a place we've never been to before. I think we can really see that in the collective at the moment as well.
absolutely. There is this energy, isn't there, of people demanding change, but demanding change in the way that they perceive it should be.
Exactly.
Which brings us to that other element of Pisces. The great gift of Pisces is learning how to surrender to what is. Whereas Aries has its desires, Aries is the sign of self. This is me. This is what I want. This is what I think should happen. Pisces is whatever is going to happen has perhaps already happened. It's that Ouroboros thing of everything is happening all at once, these eternal cycles which happen within the collective and within us. And, as we've been talking about, this point of the zodiac is the resurrection point. And the story of Inanna is the first story of
Resurrection.
resurrection. It's that story of descending into the shadow realm.
So it might be quite a good idea if maybe you could kind of fill us in on the kind of the story, the myth of Inanna, and then maybe I will share the other resurrection legend, story, myth, whatever we want to call it, and kind of we can draw the parallels and the similarities because this Venus retrograde is literally happening. I think it's a week or two before Easter. This resurrection, she comes back as morning star. So what great timing for it.
Absolutely. It feels so deeply metaphorical.
Mhm.
And the cycles of Venus are, of course, the cycles of the feminine psyche. So in the mythology of Venus, Inanna, for those who aren't familiar, Inanna is the evening star. She is the shining queen of heaven. She is the Venusian archetype to the ancient astrologers. And Inanna hears that her sister Ereshkigal, who is the ruler of the underworld, has lost her husband and is in deep grief and deep sorrow. So Inanna decides that she is going to enter the underworld. And for me, this is a really interesting point in the story because she chooses to enter the underworld and she is a goddess. So even goddesses descend, even goddesses know the importance of these cycles of descent. So the story goes that Inanna descends through each of the 7 gateways of the underworld. And in each gateway, correlating with each chakra, she takes off one of her items of queenly regalia, starting with her crown all the way down to her cloak. So when she enters the underworld, she is stripped completely bare. She has lost all of the trappings of ego and identity and status in the outside world. So she enters the underworld to find Ereshkigal in a state of sorrow and grief and rage. And the story goes that Ereshkigal kills Inanna and she hangs her on a meat hook for 3 days in the underworld. And what it's important to remember here is that Inanna and Ereshkigal are the same goddess. So what Inanna is doing is meeting those shadowy aspects of herself. She's meeting the fear, the grief, the wounding, the not enoughness, that's a very Venusian thing. It's a very feminine thing, isn't it? That feeling of not enoughness. She's meeting all of these parts of herself that she's suppressed while she's in the underworld for 3 days. So Inanna has to learn to love Ereshkigal and therefore love these disowned parts of herself and welcome them back before she's allowed to leave the underworld. So Inanna completes the task and is rescued and is allowed to leave. And she goes back up through these seven gateways, reclaiming all of her regalia. And she is reborn in the morning skies as the morning star. But she is forever changed because the purpose of going into the underworld is to transform, is to alchemize, is to do the great work. So Venus is our celestial mirror that reminds us that these cycles of descent are necessary. This stripping back is necessary. We have to let go of the habits, the relationships, the ideas, the attitudes, the self-importance, all of these things that from time to time we have to face and we have to work with. We have to see what isn't working. And with Pisces, we're very comfortable in an illusion. But Aries says, no, I'm going to do what's best for me. It's all about me. Um, so,
Yeah.
so this is, part of the shift that's happening. It's this stripping back of illusion. And it's like, who are you in front of the goddess?
And then as you kind of pick up that myth and the legend, and you realise that on the 13th of April she'll be back as the morning star. Just checking the dates now myself, 13th of April becomes Palm Sunday. So that then works literally into Holy Week, and we talk about the other resurrection story, that of Yeshua, or Jesus of Nazareth, that he is condemned to death by Pontius Pilate for pretending or claiming that he is the Son of God. Yod Hey Valde becomes Yod Hey Jin Valde. I think I've got that right. But he is the divine incarnation on earth. He is teaching us that we're all aspects of God, that we all have the power to save ourselves, yet it's changed that he died to save us. But he is condemned to death by Pontius Pilate. He's placed on a cross. He then goes through his own gateways as well. So the Catholic Church and some of the Church of England will call that the Stations of the Cross. So he picks up his cross, he walks through Jerusalem, and at one point Simon of Cyrene helps him carry the cross. Another point, he meets his mother and his sisters. At another point, he falls down. He goes, he has his face wiped, he falls down again. He's then stripped naked, nailed to the cross, and hung there. He then
Mm,
dies, is taken away to his tomb, where 3 days later, when the women, because this is the interesting part, come to dress the body, to anoint the body in the herbs and the spices. If you look up, I think it's Luke and Matthew mention that he's no longer there. He has been resurrected. And don't forget, he is the gardener in the garden, saying, "Don't you recognize who I am?" He has been irrevocably changed through his death experience. So I'm not saying that the two myths draw on each other, two legends draw on each other, but it's very much the same story, allowing the old self to die, to go through a process, to be revived and brought back, because both Inanna and Yeshua were revived. Inanna, if you look in some of the tales, was revived by the little gnats with herbs and oils and crystals.
mm,
Yeshua, the women, come with herbs to anoint his body. Now, if you look at the Essenes, who are the mystical Jewish texts, and I'm just in the middle of writing as a Substack for this actually, the priestesses and the priests would practice something called the rite of sepulchre. And the rite of sepulchre was where you could put your body into a form of stasis, which was essentially death. You then have a napkin placed over your face so they could tell when you started breathing again. And when you were ready to come back and your body indicated it was ready to come back, the priestesses would have their herbs, their oils, their toning instruments, their energy to bring the body back. And as I've been really digging into this and feeling into it, it's kind of the both, because it's happening in Inanna first, and then literally Holy Week, and then the Sunday after will be Easter, is what can these two divine beings teach us about descent into the underworld, being in a place of darkness, sitting in the void to allow ourselves to be reborn again. And if you look at the arguments around, oh, well, Jesus is nothing like Inanna because he died in the upper world. If you then go to the original Latin text of the Apostles' Creed, I won't repeat the Latin for you, but the original text translates as Pontius Pilate condemned him to death. He was hung on the cross. He died. He descended into hell. And on the third day, rose again. So that is very similar to Inanna's legend, myth, so that it's both the male and the female descending into the underworld, showing us that all parts of self now have to do it. The goddess has done it, and God himself incarnate has done it. So that for me is kind of setting the tone of what can we learn during this Venus retrograde to allow the old to die. It's a long explanation.
No, that was really, really interesting, especially the rites of the
Sepulchre.
sepulchre.
Yeah.
I really felt that as you were saying it. I could really see priestesses doing that in other times, and it really made me think of a book that I read and recommend quite a lot, Rituals in Sacred Stone, Mary Magdalene Rituals in Sacred Stone, which talks and details these kind of practices through ancient Egypt and the ancient world and beyond. And I think this is what the initiates would have done. This would have been the initiation process, where they were, maybe in Egyptian times, they were lying in their sarcophagus, or in the
Yeah.
Celtic times, they would have been, entombed within the long barrows. So every spiritual journey has an initiation point. And I think that is most often that descent into the underworld. So we have the stories of Inanna, which is arguably the first story of descent. And we have the stories of Osiris and Dionysus, the dying and resurrected gods. But what I think is really interesting about Jesus and the Christian mythos as we kind of contemplate the ending of this Piscean era
Mm.
is that he made it public.
Yeah.
He made it public. And I was listening to somebody speak about that somewhere this week, and I can't remember who now, but he made these initiation rites public. He did it in front of the whole world. And that is to show us, like Inanna tried to tell us, even goddesses descend. Everybody has to go through this process. But the gift is when we are on a spiritual journey, a priestess pathway, or any kind of, spiritually focused discipline, there will be descent points. And can we lean into them
Mm.
instead of going, no, I don't want this. I don't want to see this. I am not that. I don't have a shadow. you know,
Really?
yeah, well, you'd be surprised with some people. But it's these things that we are not willing to look at.
Yeah.
Um, and what's really interesting, I think, as well, is during this time, Black Moon Lilith is going into Scorpio.
Whoop,
Yeah.
whoop.
So yeah, very exciting. We love Scorpio. We love Scorpio around here, but this is not a regular occurrence. Again, this is a 9-year cycle. So the last time Lilith was in Scorpio was from May 2016 into 2017, when coincidentally Venus was last retrograde in Aries. So we've got this
Patterns and
kind of
cycles.
9-year cycle, cycles and cycles and cycles with astrology. But why I felt it's important to mention that is because nothing hides from Scorpio, does it?
Oh no.
Nothing hides from Scorpio. And Lilith, you could argue, is naturally at home in Scorpio. She doesn't have a traditional sign of rulership, being a mathematical point, not a traditional heavenly body. But nothing hides from Scorpio. So for me, this is this real time of not only being willing to go into the shadow, but embracing all of this taboo stuff, embracing all of these things that we don't want to admit that we want, or we don't want to admit that we are. Because for me, that is Scorpio and that is Lilith. It's what we desire and despise.
And just kind of taking that broader, thinking about kind of how that works in the collective, how it works in, the communities in which we move in, different communities, it's actually really getting uncomfortable and then comfortable with the discomfort, getting comfortable with desire. There is nothing to feel shameful or guilty about having desire and wanting. We are here as goddesses incarnate on earth to find joy as well as having our life path. And I think for me, if you're really looking at some of the energies at the moment, the joy is just not there anymore. It's kind of just been siphoned off very, very slowly. But actually,
Mm,
for me, Lilith moving back into Scorpio, Venus in Aries, what do you want? And how much do you want it? And how are you going to get it? That's the energy really coming back in. And I know we've talked about this about Pluto moving into Aquarius, but it's the wrecking ball through perceived spirituality. It, for me, is going back to who we were as the original priestesses, as the original virgins, whole unto themselves. And it's breaking through the taboo of actually saying spirituality can involve sex, it can involve desire, and it should be joyful.
absolutely. If you look at some of the poetry of Inanna, who will plow my vulva and all of this, in the hymns of Inanna. And I think for me, Venus in Aries is a really strong representation of the red current of the goddess,
Mm.
which is that Babylonian face, which is, red. It's lust and it's war as much as it's Pisces. It's this unconditional compassion. So it really is this kind of Babylonic energy that just makes love to everything. It welcomes every experience because it knows that the descent is as important as the resurrection. We don't need to rush through that process. We can find joy in the letting go. We can find joy in the surrender. We can find joy in the taboo.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, again, very interesting seeing all of this kind of Bianca Censori stuff, Bonnie Blue in the news. Dare we mention that on a podcast?
Yes, we just have.
Yeah. So it's this, these things are being sold as feminine empowerment.
Mm.
Yeah. And is that true empowerment? Or is this another program that we are
Oh,
being invited to participate in? Yeah. Because they're in the media a lot, which is always a sign that it is something that we need to witness.
and for me, always comes back to the Matrix and comes
Yeah.
back to the line of, are you listening to me, Neo, or are you watching the woman in the red dress? So actually, where are you going? What is the distraction being brought by these exhibitions, shall we say, of female form?
Mm, mm,
What is that actually distracting you from? And I can guarantee it's one, not looking at your own shadow because, ooh, that's a bit manky at times, but it's distracting you from finding the divine within, distracting you from allowing yourself to die, to surrender, to be rebirthed because you're too busy watching, not necessarily wanting, but watching what and vicariously living through other people. It's the disconnection back from your soul, disconnection from your body, disconnection from your own divinity. So, what are you really watching?
that is really interesting. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, it's these scenarios, these things that we're viewing are the perfect place for us to be doing shadow work because what we are projecting it's always something we need to look at, like, oh, she's disgusting, she's too sexy, she's being manipulated. Whatever it is that we are so decisive about this person's experience that we, um, get ourselves worked up and give our power away over is always something that we need to look at within ourselves.
Really kind of tacking on to that as well, of thinking that actually, if we look at our natal chart as well, and a wise woman taught me this, that the wounds of sisterhood often show up in our Venus placements. But also, if you think about this warrior goddess, this fighting goddess and the boundaryless goddess of Pisces, as Venus does this traversing of two faces. But actually, if you're boundaryless, are you going to be open to attack? And if you're fierce and warrior like, are you actually setting people alike, rubbing people up the other way? What wounds are coming out through our projection onto other women? So, this isn't just this lifetime, this is generations of stuff coming up. And if this is the
Absolutely.
bridging year, ready for the Saturn Neptune conjunction next year, then maybe this is the year that we have to sort it out.
Absolutely. Because Venus in Aries is also the burning woman, isn't it? It's
Really?
the
The
burning,
visions, the remembrance. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it's that, it's Venus in the sign of the first fire. So that's another great book, Lucy Pierce, Burning Woman. That could be a
Mhm.
really powerful one to read during or revisit during this retrograde, because it talks about the fears that we all have at a cellular
Mm,
level, sorry, the memories we all have from these burning times. And quite often, women would persecute each other. We would turn on each other to save ourselves or in order to win the favor of men, because this again is a very deep wound in the collective psyche, isn't it? Of we center men, we center their happiness because our survival would have depended on them at one time. So I think this extreme kind of things that we're seeing from people like Bianca and Bonnie, in a way, is also inviting us to, you know, liberate ourselves from this old conditioning as well. So whatever our opinions are on that, it's about liberation, isn't it? It's about freedom.
mm, absolutely. And allowing everyone to live their life as they wish to live their life. But I do think it's going to be interesting to see the energy on social media over the next couple of weeks as to whether we're actually bonding as a collective, as a group of sisters, or are we pitching ourselves against each other? Are we, becoming very polarized? And that is the one thing we cannot do at this moment in time is become polarized, because that, one, it shuts off your heart, but two, it actually shuts you down and puts you back into the program, puts you back into the matrix, because you're not being with the collective. I think it's going to be a very interesting time.
It is. And I think, as we always discuss, in the magical work, in the astrological work, everything comes down to the reconciliation of the opposites. Can you hold both polarities? Because the the matrix, the system we're in, can only be sustained when we're in opposition with each other. So if you can say to somebody, I don't agree with you, but I am willing to sit with your point of view. I'm not going to persecute you for your point of view. I'm not going to burn you alive from your point of view,
Yeah,
for your
yeah,
point
it's
of
not
view,
nice. Yeah.
because we are seeing the resurrection of this kind of fundamentalism as well. And this is one of the dangers with Neptune in Aries. We've had the Inquisitions, we've had the Crusades, and now these people are again becoming very emboldened.
Mm.
So I I think that it's very, very important for us to temper our Aries fire with some of the Pisces compassion as well during this period. Because
Yeah.
Mars is going back into Leo as well. So that's something
More fire.
to also consider in the future. But
And
I
then
think for now, yeah.
we've also got to consider at the same time while we're discussing our inner wounds, while we're discussing the wounds of sisterhood, the persecution, the burning times, we've also got Mercuria doing her dance. So she'll dance with Venus for a little while over the Aries Pisces threshold. And we both have Mercury in Aries. We can both be eloquent and fiery and, how should we say, determined often to make our point.
Yeah.
But what we're having to think about is while we're in the underworld, while we're in the descent, whatever that looks like for us and whatever it looks like for another, we really have to think about our communication. We have to think about not just how are we speaking to other people, but also how are we speaking to ourselves in this time? Are we in the modern day? You can't take any time off, you can't do the inner work, you can't think this about yourself, you can't do this, you haven't got time. Very Aries, we've never got time to do everything. We have to have it done yesterday. Or can you be very Piscean about it? Can you really sink into the waters? But actually, if you're very Piscean about it, you're going to lose your boundaries. The communication is going to be blurred. So, kind of adding the next layer on top of this, I can see kind of very explosive communication, followed by very wafty communication where no one's really clear. It's some of this kind of chaotic Neptunian fog, really, as Mercury moves around. But we say this with every Mercury retrograde, but watch your words. Watch how you're
Mm,
speaking to others. But this time, I feel really watching how you're speaking to yourself. Yes, you've got the time. Why are you not important?
absolutely. I think it's a really interesting one. Because Mercury is Hermes, the Thoth is the magician in the tarot, right? It's the
Yeah.
weaver of words, it's the word witch. And Mercury in Pisces can be shifty,
Mm-hmm.
it can be slippery. So, what I can see here is people getting very fired up about things that might not actually be true.
Uh-huh.
I think it's very, very important that we recognize that we are still in a gestation phase, where we've been with this Mars retrograde, literally gestating
Mm.
with Mars in Cancer. Now we're switching into this Venus retrograde energy at the end of the month. And again, Aries, Mars, it's go, 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 forward, forward, forward. Now, 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 right? I haven't got enough time, this kind of thing. So during this period, I think it's really important for us to find that void,
Mm.
to be, as you so rightly said, comfortable with the discomfort and comfortable with the unknown. This is Pisces, comfortable with the unknown. So that's Pisces. Time is eternal, but it is always running out. Everything is happening at once, but we want it all now. This is Pisces to Aries.
There's us there looking at our watch going, come on, come on.
Absolutely.
I was speaking to one of my brilliant friends in Germany the other day, and I think she told me her word of 2025 was going to be surrender. And I thought, oh, that's nice. You enjoy that. And then actually, it's like, actually, do you know what? That's the place that we all need to be in this year is surrender, allowing, really gifting ourselves the time. It's not the year to be pushing forward to have loads and loads of goals. It's the year that actually we need to kind of shed, let go of. I mean, it's a 9 year, right? So it is the end of a cycle. But to me, the only way I think I'm going to get through this period is surrender and gin. So it'll be quite But it's really about surrendering. This year is about surrendering and allowing the old to be washed away.
It is, and I think because there's so many huge planetary shifts, which we'll be talking about over the upcoming months, there is no need to force because things are going to change.
Yeah.
Like we're planning for a future in a world that doesn't exist yet. Things are changing
Exactly.
so much. Things are
Yeah.
changing so much. We can't plan for the future in the ways that we used to be able to, that our grandparents could, or even our parents could. The world that we are, trying to envision a future for is constantly changing, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I think for me as well, when you hear people saying, oh, in 2030, it'll be like this, 2035, it's going to be like that. It's like, hell, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. There are several fingers over the
Mm,
nuclear buttons in various places in the world at the moment. We just don't know what is going to happen. And there is no fixity about planning. These foundations, particularly with Saturn in Pisces, they're just being constantly washed away. And then Neptune would come back and
mm,
just do a bit more washing for us. It's cyclical, but it's getting really comfortable again with the discomfort of not knowing, of not being able to plan, of not seeing maybe further than tomorrow and next week. The future is changing, and if we're very rigid and fixed about what is to come, then actually we're not going to bring forward the highest timeline because we're so fixated on a thing. So, giving you an example, we're very fixated, for example, that hoverboards would come in 2032. Fixated
that's a
on that
horrible.
because actually, one, that just sounds painful when I fall off. And two, actually, if we're so fixated on that, we might be preventing a higher timeline coming through. We might be preventing something
Mm,
else being invented. We might be preventing, I don't know, ascension moving forward, more alchemy because we're fixated. So it is really about surrendering and just trusting that, you know, we wake up the next morning and we carry on because we just don't know.
absolutely. And I think that's the thing with Aries and Venus in Aries, isn't it? It's that I'm alive.
Mm.
I'm alive now. What can I do with this day? Aries lives for the moment. It's very, very impulsive. So it's how can I be alive in the now? Yeah, what can I create from this chaos? Because I think that is the how the descent becomes a magical initiation, isn't it? People get stuck in their descent. People get stuck in their, Pisces shadows of victimhood and misery and imprisonment.
Mm.
They don't follow on with the resurrection part. So it's what can I create? What can I learn? How can I make this a initiation which takes me closer to igniting my star fire or my stellar body or whatever you want to call it, that kind of true core self. Yeah, how can I use these experiences to take me closer to that? How can I make magic from these unwanted experiences or emotions?
And that perhaps then, coming kind of full circle, becomes the myth of the Aquarian Aeon, the story that is told to, the generations yet to come. It isn't about one person. It is about how the collective or the singular, to me, there's no name to this, but how actually went into the descent, broke themselves free of the control of the matrix, which is essentially what we're doing every time we strip away more shadow, we're breaking out the old conditioning, and ignited that starfire, ignited the stellar body to step out as the divine here on earth. That is really where our focus needs to be. It doesn't need to be distracted by what is going on your social media feed, what is going on in the world. Actually, this is about you really stepping into that ignition. And when you were saying that, igniting the stellar body, if you think of Inanna's seven gateways as the seven chakras, and then you start thinking about the ascension pathway that some people could be on, and then using the 15 chakras. So Jesus had 14 gates, 14 stations of the cross, but actually we're adding in another layer to it. So we're actually igniting a bigger sense of self, igniting more energy centers to allow us to find the divinity within. So maybe that is going to be part of the myth of finding that ignition within us, but then constantly surrendering every time we have a Venus cycle into the next level of becoming.
Absolutely. And that's, such a message of the symbology of the spiral, which obviously we work with in
Yeah.
the priestess realms, which is representative of the wheel of the zodiac. There is no final destination. It's becoming and unbecoming. It's Pisces to Aries, Pisces to Aries, the serpent eating its own tail over and over and over again.
It never learn.
It never lands. It's constant. This is the essence of living on Earth, isn't it? It's unavoidable. And as the processional cycle tells us, it's continual cycles. Civilizations rise and fall. The old gods become the new gods.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting as we kind of talk about that procession of the equinoxes and we think about actually the fall of civilizations, the fall of empires. Thinking about the disruptors of change at the moment, not mentioning any names, but are they actually closing off empires? Are they actually stopping empires? Are they, because empires, don't forget now, isn't necessarily about how much land that they own around the globe. Actually, the empires could be the more capitalist systems. It could be the banks, the investments, the way that departments have been run, shall we say. We actually seen the collapse and end of empire in the way that the disruptors are coming through to create change. And I'm thinking in America, but I'm also thinking here in the UK as well, the end of the the empire, so to speak. It's in its next phase. That could be disappearing shortly. The EU, if you think about the EU as an empire, very unstable at the moment as well. Think about Russia, incredibly unstable. China, is that the rise of a new empire? It's that energy of really disruption coming through of actually, are we actually watching dismantling rather than rebuilding at the moment?
Just going to grab my laptop charger. To agree with you there. I think it's a slightly different way to, slightly different thing that we're witnessing in the timeline. It's one empire being maybe replaced by another, by a more AI technocratic type
Mm.
of empire. And I think it's really important to remember that at these times, these chaos points, as we talked about in our first podcast, the the changes that humanity goes through and what emerges because of those changes are determined by the collective level of consciousness.
Yeah.
So I feel like our intention with these descent points, like Venus retrograde, is, goddess, strip me of anything which is not serving a purpose. Goddess, strip me of all of the attachments and systems that I am locked into that are not serving me. And we free ourselves and we free everybody around us.
Mm. So, really, although we may be doom and gloom, actually enjoy the 42 days of Venus retrograde. Really think about how you are going to use this for your greatest good. Are you ready to surrender? Have you plan your time? If I if I know I'm going to surrender, I do try and think a little bit about what's coming ahead. But as you and I know, I recently said my vows to God. I just I surrender. It's complete shit show. Thanks for that one. But planning little bits of self care dates sometimes because it's going to be a powerful time. Create the group of women or men around you who can support you, who you can say, today I am descending. And actually, could someone just make sure I'm all right at 5 o'clock? Because, I'm, can you just throw me the rope ladder down so I can see my way out? It's really about want to say enjoying the experience, but I think that's the Scorpio, right? It's really about going into it and being aware that anything can happen, and just making sure occasionally you've got a date with yourself, even if it's for 10 minutes on the loo, whatever you do, without your phone, just allowing yourself to really descend. And for those of you who will really want to throw yourself into it, we're with you all the way. And
Absolutely.
really, just go with it. Allow yourself to feel.
Allow yourself to feel and welcome and receive everything as the goddess does. She is light and she is shadow. She is beautiful and she is terrifying. And that is life. And we can find those moments of joy in everything. I mean, I say this a lot. The feeling of heart opening is very similar to the feeling of heartbreaking. They're a very similar sensation. And that's often what Venus retrograde does. It breaks us open. It's a striptease of the soul,
Oh,
I always like to say. It reminds me of the dance of the seven veils as well. And I love a Venus retrograde. I really enjoy this process and being able to watch it as well. It's one of
mm,
those retrogrades. We can watch Mercury as well, but we don't tend to hone in on Mercury in the same way as we do with Venus because Mercury's retrogrades are more common.
yeah,
So you can witness the rebirth of the goddess, you can witness the ascent of the goddess, and you can feel it within yourself.
absolutely. And if you look at the night sky at the moment, as I've been kind of observing, she's there kind of what we'd say up north, tea time. So kind of 5:30, 6 o'clock. She's there with the moon, but it's
Yeah.
getting earlier and earlier and earlier, and then she's just gonna go. And then it'd be the wonderful time where we can get up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and see her come back. It is really, I remember doing it at the last Venus retrograde actually. It is really, really magical.
Mm.
And it's that moment, the first time you see her is, do you know what? You've made it. You've done it. Well done. You've got 18 months off before the next one.
Absolutely. I have a really strong memory of the previous Venus retrograde in Leo, which may be the last thing we'll touch on actually, which
Mm,
was in, the summer, August time of 2023. And I have this really strong image of getting up early to go to Stonehenge on the autumn equinox, where she had just risen as the morning star, and Sally Shakti and obviously James was there too. And we just witnessed her in the morning sky, a sight of just such bewitching beauty.
mm,
And that is why we go through these descent processes, so we can remember the beauty that surrounds us as well, because
yeah,
things would be very, very boring without descent, without change, hey?
very, very true. So just as we wrap up, we're gonna be posting this very, very shortly. I've got an article to come out on Substack around Venus and Yeshua. However, I'm gonna hand over to Maria because she's got some really exciting events coming up over the next few weeks.
Thank you. And the first thing, of course, is the spiral training, which begins during the Venus retrograde. It begins around
Oh,
the time of the star point. We're meeting in Glastonbury the 22nd and 23rd, but we also have fully online options available, so you can join us from anywhere in the world. We had loads of amazing new Sisters of the Stars dedicating in Avalon and all over the globe last weekend. So the web is widening. But if you want to learn about how these things impact you, things like your own Venus and Lilith placement, your own archetypical energies, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat.
and I do
And
believe you have quite an interesting, lovely assisting you this year as well on the online space. That'll be me, people.
can they handle two Aries, hey? Yeah. It's going to be a really, really powerful year. And I think who better to guide people through it than people with Venus in Pisces and the Sun in Aries. We can embody that energy for you and also teach you a little bit of magic.
And do you have a little workshop coming up as well?
I do. Not this Sunday, the following Sunday. The date has left my mind. I think it's the 18th of February.
Mm.
But you can find all of the information on my Facebook page. And that will be focused around this mythology of the descent of Inanna, the Venus retrograde. And I will be helping those of you who don't know find your Venus placements and learn a little bit about that. But that will be a collaboration with my lovely friend Lisa, who is very skilled at EFT and other transformational modalities. So we will actually be working with it in quite a physical, tangible way, very much focused around self-love. Yeah,
Sounds amazing. And we, of course, put all the details in the show notes. So it just leaves me to thank you, Maria, for another extraordinary magical chat.
it's been so fun. It's been so fun. I love doing these with you.
Great fun. And we will see you all very, very soon. And until then, take care.